Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today we're taking a brief look at the history of houses.
我们的中文标题是关于房屋的大小事。
Originally, I thought this was a brief history of houses, and I was thinking this is very brief indeed, but we're just doing a look. It's a short look at the history of houses. So that's a tiny but important nuance.
好，各位注意到这个标题啊，其实取得很聪明啊，而且很精准。如果他讲的是 A Brief History of Houses， 那就是一个房屋简史。那短短2天，短短几百个字，你说要讲这个房屋的简史，很难写得好啊，而且呢，你会漏掉很多很多重要的东西啊。所以他这个地方他写着 A Brief Look at the History of Houses， 所以他是很简短的看一下房屋的简史，所以或者房屋的历史，所以就比较符合我们这个文章的长度啊，而且比较符合事实，因为它只是 a brief look， 很短暂的看一下而已。
It's very good at managing our expectations.
那它对于这个 managing 就是经营，或者是让我们读者有正当的或者正常的一个期待，在这方面它是很有效果。就是如果你讲说 a brief history of houses， 那读者就你要讲的是整个房屋的历史啊，他就会觉得你大概不知道怎么讲，会讲很多，讲重要的东西等等的。但他这里告诉你，我只是 a brief look 啊，那我们就知道 OK， 好，你只是个 brief look。
Okay, let's read this brief look. As a famous expression goes, home is where the heart is.The saying conveys that despite a person's current place of residence, their true home is the location that holds the strongest emotional connection for them. Notice, though, that the expression is not, a house is where the heart is. That's because the words house and home are not entirely the same. A home can be anywhere a person lives, a house, an apartment, or even a boat or a car, if one lives and sleeps in a vehicle.So, when we examine the history of human accommodations, it's important to make a distinction between the first homes and the original houses. Even with this belief as a guideline, however, there is still considerable debate. Some historians believe that the first structures that could truly be called houses appeared around 3500 BCE, over 5,000 years ago, and were made of stone.Others say they date back even further, arguing that the first permanent houses were constructed by farmers in the Middle East around 11,000 years ago. Still, others believe prehistoric houses can be traced back to 1.8 million years ago, but that is more of a controversial position. When it comes to the history of human dwellings, it's useful to note how the designs and building materials reflect lifestyles,and major developments in civilizations. In nomadic societies, there has always been less need for permanent structures made of stone or mud brick, and tents made of animal skins were more suitable in many cases, for example. However, as humans developed agricultural techniques and established permanent settlements, the need for long-lasting buildings arose. Stone and brick, depending on the availability of the material,were often used for ancient homes. Later, wooden structures and more elaborate architectural styles became common in places where timber was plentiful. Okay, we're in the middle of the article, but we're going to stop here for today and go back to the beginning and talk about each sentence. As a famous expression goes, home is where the heart is.This is beyond famous, and people make jokes about it all the time. Like recently I saw something, home is where the toothbrush is. And I'm like, that's true.
Yep. 所以呢，这个 as a famous expression goes, 就是中文讲的有句名言是怎么说的 Home is where the heart is. 家是心之所在。那这个其实不只是有名，这个几乎已经有一定 cliché 的地步了啊。那很多人呢就会玩文字游戏哈，那像刚刚这个 Angela 讲说，他最近看到一个很有趣，他说这个家是牙刷之所在，好，你牙刷在哪里，你家就在哪里哈，这个也蛮有道理的。但不管怎么说，这是一个英文里面很有名的一个，真的是 a famous expression 啊 ，Home is where the heart is.
So the saying conveys or gives us the impression that, or tells us or gives us the information that, despite a person's current place of residence, Their true home is the location that holds the strongest emotional connection for them. And that's the point of what home is where the heart is. So it doesn't matter where your actual residence or address or tax-paying address is, or it's actually where your packages get sent to. It's where your strongest emotional connection is.
好，所以呢 The saying convey 就是传达意思。它传达了什么意思呢？它传达的意思就是 that despite a person's current place of residence， 不管一个人 current 目前他 place of residence 就是居住的地方啊，不管你现在是住在哪里，目前是住在哪里 ，residence 就是居住的意思啊，所以 place of residence 就是居住的地方。所以无论一个人住在哪里，他的 true home， 他真正的家是 the location， 就是一个地方、一个地点、一个位置 that holds 具有 the strongest 最强的 emotional connection 情感的联系啊 for them， 对于他们来讲。真正的家就是他有最强的情感联系的一个地方。好，所以你可能住在宿舍里面，可是你的家啊，是你的家人所住的那个地方，是你跟你是有最强的情感联系的地方。
Notice, though, that the expression is not a house is where the heart is. We're talking about homes, not houses.
好 ，notice 就是要注意哦，哈 ，though 不过我们要注意 that the expression。这个说法，这句名言不是说 a house is where the heart is， 不是说那个住的那个房子是你心之所在啊，因为在这里显然他就在告诉你，英文里面 home 跟 house 是有差别的。
And that's the next sentence. That's because the words house and home are not entirely the same.
好 ，that's because 那是因为这两个字 house 跟 home。are not entirely the same 啊，并不完全相同啊。有的时候用的时候感觉起来好像两个字意思差不多，指的是同一个地方，但事实上这两个字在英文里面，它使用的方法或者使用的场合是有区别的。
So a home can be anywhere a person lives. It could be a house, an apartment, or even a boat or a car if one lives and sleeps in a vehicle. Like you might have a houseboat.Or one of those mobile tiny homes or whatever.
好，所以 a home 家 can be 可以是 anywhere a person lives， 一个人住的任何的地方都可以是你的 home， 是你的家。但是呢 a house 啊，那个物理的那个建筑啊，那 house 通常也是指整栋的房屋了哈。那在这里，尤其是他后面又讲到 an apartment， 所以这个 house 指的就是整栋的房屋、独栋的房屋了啊。独栋房屋还有呢。公寓 an apartment 或者甚至于 a boat 你如果住在船屋里面啊，或者是 a car 有的人可能住在车子里面，那 car 的话它就括号，它如果你是 lives 居住而且 sleeps 而且睡觉都是在一个 vehicle 啊，在一辆车辆里面啊。当然在美国有些房租很贵的地方，其实啊有的人真的是住在车子里面。好，所以呢这里讲到家就是 home 呢，它可以是一个人住的任何地方，好，不管是独栋房屋还是公寓，好，甚至于可能是个船，可能是个车子，好，都可能是你的 home.
So, when we examine the history of human accommodations, this is a very fancy way of saying that when we look at the history of what people live in, accommodations is a word that means giving people a place to live and bathe, actually. You're accommodating their needs, and you're accommodating their needs for shelter and cleanliness. Accommodations does not include food, however. So we can use accommodations to talk about hotels or short-term residents or long-term residents. So when we examine the history of people living in a place, it's important to make a distinction, a separation, to define the difference between the first homes and the original houses.
所以呢，我们这里看到说，所以呢，当我们在 examine， 我们在检视 the history of 什么的历史呢 ？Human accommodations 就是人类住宿的历史哈。那 accommodation 这个字，各位在用的时候要注意哈。首先，它不包含食物啊，它只是指住宿啊，尤其是指住宿的地方。那住宿呢？是什么概念呢？就是你在那里睡觉，你可以在那里睡觉，然后呢在那里盥洗 啊，这叫 accommodation 这个概念。那同时它可以是长期的，也可以是短期的啊。好，所以当我们在谈到人类住宿的历史的时候呢， it's important to 我们很重要的是应该要 make a distinction between 就这两个之间我们要做一个区别。什么东西做区别呢？ The first homes 就是最早被人当作家的地方，还有呢 the original houses 啊，就最早的房子，最初的那个房子啊。所以 home 跟 houses 是不一样， house 指的是那个物理的那个建筑。
Honestly, when I read that sentence the first time, I was very confused. Like, because what are they talking about? But what he's saying is that there's a difference between homes, a place that you consider where you live, and it could be any structure, and houses, which are actual structures that are houses. And he was saying, so we have to make a distinction between all of the things people have lived in and the things you can actually call a house, so that we can look at the history of houses as a structure.
好，所以他的意思就是因为 home 可以是任何地方，他刚刚讲了船啊、车啊、这个公寓啊，还有独栋房子都可以哈，所以他要区别一下。所以我们这里谈的不是 home， 我们这里谈的是 house， 就是整栋的这个独立的那种所谓的 house 我们要谈的是这个 house 的历史。
Okay, so even with this belief as a guideline, though, this decision about what makes a house as a way to decide what is a house, however, there is still considerable debate. Considerable means something you have to consider. It's a large enough amount that you have to take it to an account. So there is a serious debate. There's a large debate about what actually is the first house.
好，所以即使有这样的一个 belief 一个信念一个想法 as a guideline 作为一个准则那 there is still 仍然有 considerable 就是可观的或者相当的 debate 争论或者辩论所以即使我们把 house 跟 home 把它区分出来了，但是关于这个所谓的 houses 它的历史仍然是有相当的辩论。
Okay, so now let's talk about that. Some historians believe that the first structures that could truly be called houses, that they were purpose-built for people to live in, they appeared or showed up around 35,000 BCE. BCE is before Common Era, and so we're in the year 2022. Yes, we're in the year 2022. And so that means that 2,222 years ago, was the year 0, which is the Common Era. So 3,500 years before that is a little over 5,000 years ago.
好，所以呢，有一些历史学家 believe 在这里可以翻成认为有一些历史学家认为最早的 structures 就是 buildings 建筑物that could truly be called houses 可以真的被称为 houses 的这种最早的建筑呢 appeared 出现大概是这个西元前3500年BCE 就是西元前。那这个呢用一个同位语告诉你，这差不多是超过5000年，也就是5000多年前的事情。好，然后呢这些房子呢 were made of stone 是由石头盖成的。
Others say, so we're having a chain of sentences. The first one is some say, the second one is others say, and the third one will be still others say. And since using the word say over and over again is repetitive, so we used believe the first time and say the second time, and then we went back to believe for the third time. And that's okay. You can repeat the word once because there's not so many words that you can use to represent that someone thinks a thing. So our sentence is, others say they date back even further. So they think that houses are even earlier than 5,000 years ago. Arguing that or saying that the first permanent houses, the very first houses that were purpose-built to last a long time, were constructed or built by farmers in the Middle East around 11,000 years ago. So here's our second date.
好，所以呢，这里呢，他在谈不同历史学家的意见，这个时候他就会最好的最典型的一种用法就是 some historians believe 如何如何，然后呢 others 可能换一个动词 say 如何如何那在接下来另外一群人的话呢，你就讲 still others， 然后再换一个动词 believe 如何如何那这里采取的就是这样的一个策略。所以我们刚刚讲完的 some historians 有一些人认为是大概5000多年前就有的这个 可以被称为房子的这样的建筑。那 others 就是 other historians， 其他的历史学家 say 他们认为呢 they date back 就是最早可以被称为 houses 的建筑呢 date back 可以往前追溯 even further 就是还可以更早，还要更早。然后 arguing that 主张 argue 在这里是主张的意思，就是 maintaining M-A-I-N-T-A-I-N 他们 maintaining 他们主张呢 the first 最早的 permanent houses 就是永久性的房子，也就是说他们不是说这个今天晚上在这就让随便搭一搭明天就换别的地方了，而是真的就是我们要在这里定居下来了，我们要永久性，当然不可能永久就是我们持久性的，我们打算在这里住下去的。所以他说第一个这种永久性的房子呢是 constructed 建造，是由 farmers 由农夫所建造的，这是在中东，那差不多呢是11000年前。
And so our third iteration of what someone believes is still others believe prehistoric houses before written history, can be traced back to 1.8 million years ago. This is a good use of traced back to, because when you trace something, it's like you're trying to find a line that's barely followable. And so trying to find evidence of 1.8 million years ago is a really uncertain endeavor. So traced back to gives you that sense of like almost, it's a little bit uncertain. But we think it was 1.8 million years ago. But that is more of a controversial position. If something is controversial, it means that people argue about it. It's not completely accepted. And so our triple whammy of cases is first 5,000 and then 11,000 and the third one is 1.8 million. So that is the structure of storytelling. You start with a small one and then a medium one, and then you try to find the most extreme example so that your reader goes, wow.
好，所以呢我们看到所以第三群人 still others 就是 still other historians believe 他们认为 prehistoric houses 就是史前的房子 can be traced back to trace 也是在这里真的是追溯的意思。好，你按着各种迹象往回追，所以它可以被追溯到怎么样180万年前，哇，那一下子跳更远但是呢 that is more of 就是比较是的意思所以 that is more of a controversial position controversial 就是有争议性的 position 是立场，所以等于说大家对于这个到底能不能追到180万年前，大家是比较有争议的。换句话说，前面两个大家都觉得也许你真的可以这样去 argue。
So when it comes to the history of human dwellings, dwelling being another word for a place one lives, it's useful to note, or it's important, or it's helpful to pay attention to how the designs and building materials reflect lifestyles. So how they design their house is going to reflect how they live. It's going to reflect their lifestyle. So if everyone cooks for themselves, for each family cooks on their own, then you're going to have individual kitchens and individual small apartments. If the whole community cooks together, you're going to have one giant kitchen and there won't be cooking facilities in individual rooms. So how you build things reflect how you live. And it also reflects major development in civilizations. So in ancient Rome, if you were going to have a cooking fire in your apartment, you'd need a fireplace. But in modern Taipei, no one has a fireplace in their house, but we do have gas stoves. So gas stove is a different technology than a wood-burning fireplace. And so that is also going to be reflected in your architecture, because if you have a wooden fireplace, you need a place for the smoke to go out.
好，所以呢这个讲到说 when it comes to 当我们要谈到这个人类的 dwellings 住所的历史的时候呢 it's useful to know 就是我们注意一下这件事情是很重要的所以我们要稍微注意一下，注意什么呢？ How the designs and building materials 设计就是这些住所的设计还有建材 building materials 他们是如何的 reflect 反映了 lifestyles 生活方式还有呢他们反映的是 major developments 重大的发展 in civilizations 在各文明他们重大的发展。那就像刚刚 Angela 老师举的例子，就如果说每一家自己会煮饭的话，那每一个房子 大概就需要煮饭的设备。好，那如果不需要的话，那可能这个整个 community 要一个很大的厨房。好，然后呢，也要看看你这个文明的发展状况。你如果说都是瓦斯炉的话，那就不用烟囱啊。但如果说是燃煤或者是木材的炉灶的话，你可能就要有排烟的设备等等的。所以这些都会反映在建筑的材料还有建筑的设计上面。
So in nomadic societies, or I'd like to add in seasonal cultures where people move from place to place or move from one place to another and back again, there has always been less need for permanent structures made of stone or mud brick. If you're moving around a lot, you don't need to build a long-term house. And so tents made of animal skins were more suitable. Especially when you're moving around, it's suitable to just carry a lightweight tent with you.were more suitable in many cases, for example.
OK, 好，所以呢，在 nomadic 就是游牧式的，好 the societies 游牧式的社会里面啊，或者是包括你要随季节迁徙的这样的社会里面呢 there has always been less need for 就是一直对于什么东西有比较少的需求啊，所以游牧式的社会里面对于什么东西一直有比较少的需求呢？对于这种 permanent structures 有永久性的构筑或者 structures 也可以说是建筑，对于永久性的建筑需求比较小，因为游牧式它要跑来跑去嘛啊。那这种永久性的建筑啊，尤其是 made of stone 是由石头做的，或者是 mud brick 或者是这个泥砖做的这种永久性的建筑呢，在游牧式的社会里面比较不需要。好，然后呢 tents 他们反而需要是帐篷。那帐篷是怎么样？是 made of animal skins 由动物的毛皮所做成的帐篷，是 were more suitable 是更合适的 in many cases 在很多情况之下是更合适的。所以游牧民族他们大概都是用帐篷，而且帐篷很多时候都是用兽皮搭成的帐篷，他们要走就帐篷拆一拆就带走了，到新地方再把它搭起来就好了。好 for example 这是他举例的。
However, as humans developed agricultural techniques, and agriculture means planting plants and sticking around for them to help them grow and then to reap the rewards from the plant, to get the food from the plant. So you're going to stay in one place when you're using agriculture technique. So you're going to establish permanent settlements. You're going to build things for the long term. And you're going to have a need for long-lasting buildings. You don't want to build a building and then it just less than a year is broken.So the need for long-lasting buildings arose. This need came up. We suddenly discovered a need for permanent houses.
好，相对而言呢 as humans 随着人类 developed 发展 agricultural techniques 随着人类发展农业技术，而且呢 established 建立了 permanent 永久性的 settlements 聚落，这个时候的 the need for 对于什么的需求？对于 long-lasting buildings。Long-lasting 就是持久或者耐久的这种建筑，对于这种持久耐久建筑的需求呢，就 arose 就是出现或者增加啊 to come into being 出现了，或者是 rise R-I-S-E。
Stone and brick, depending on the availability of the material, were often used for ancient homes. So the original sentence is that stone and brick were used for ancient homes. We would build our homes with bricks and stone.Depending on what? Depending on if we could get the thing. So if we could get stone, we would build with stone. If we couldn't get it, we would build with brick.
所以呢，石头跟砖块 stone and brick， 然后呢 depending on the availability of the material， depending on 就是什么而定，是 availability 就是可取得性 of the material 这个建材的可取得性，就是看你有没有了，你找得到找不到。你如果找得到的话，你找得到石头，你大概就用石头；你找得到或者是能取得 brick， 你就用 brick。所以 stone and brick 通常会被用来好 for ancient homes， 古代的住家通常都是由石头或者砖头做成的。
Later, wooden structures and more elaborate architectural styles became common in places where timber was plentiful. So if we had wood, we would also build with wood.
好，后来呢 wooden structures 就是木造房屋，好，木造建筑，还有呢 more elaborate 就是比较繁复的 architectural styles 建筑风格啊，就变得比较 common。在哪些地方变得比较 common 呢？ In places where timber was plentiful， 在一些 timber 就是木材啊，这里是指木头的建材 plentiful 就是很多的意思啊，所以在木材很多容易取得的地方呢，那木造建筑就开始变得更常见了，而且因为木造，所以它可以有比较繁复的建筑风格。
Okay, that's all we have for you on this look at the history of houses today, but join us again tomorrow for the rest of the article. Until then,
bye-bye.